Throughout my entire educational career, I've sometimes come across teachers in classrooms teaching a subject, and despite being taught the subject matter, I always tend to have some prior knowledge of the subject beforehand. And I always wondered, well, like, why is that? And after thinking and contemplating what the reasons may be, I've come to the realization that my prior knowledge that I contained throughout my life was due to the media, such as video games, movies, and television. And that's why today I want to explain for you the influential impacts that the media has on the youth. And today I'm going to be talking about each of the different categories that the media influences children, like video games, movies, and televisions, and each of the subcategories that benefits children. So to start off my main point, video games. To start off my main point is the first one is video games, and the reason video games are beneficial to children in helping their education is because video games actually helps promote building up their character and kind of like how they grow up to be, and it also creates empathy and helps influence different characteristics that a child brings with them into their adult life. Some video games, they tend to portray a protagonist or like a good guy, which many children, especially young children, tend to always look up to, and they tend to mimic them. Some of these video games, the main protagonists in the video games, they tend to have positive characteristics, like in terms of like war video games, they tend to have more courage and just kind of bravery, and that kind of makes children be inspired, and that kind of shapes who they, kind of like how their morals are and who they become as an adult. Carl Liu, an expert in child studies, she quotes, "It's the block of morality breeds courage and reduces prejudice and racism. But it is not something that can be instituted from a book or verbal repetition. It emerges in emotional situations which video games can stimulate." Also, another point with the benefits of video games is that it's more of a visual, kind of like the visuals. Children tend to be more interacted with stuff that they can see, and they can be more involved in, which video games offer. In terms of the visual settings, children often it offers children a better understanding of the history or of the era in which the video game tries to portray, and it also it's a better understanding of the history and the subject matter of the era. In terms of the time period, some video games, they portray different time settings. Some video games, they could be portrayed back in like medieval times, and some children, for them it's just a game, but as you start getting more advanced in the video game, you could actually find yourself remembering some of the key locations and points within the video game that it's based on. But you could also figure that in your social studies class, you could find out that it's the same setting, because most video games, they tend to be around a more, I guess, through history, a more stuff that happened throughout history. My second main point that I want to talk about is movies. Movies helps promote education, and there's many movies that portray like war or historical events throughout history. There's many movies that I've watched when I was a kid, like 300 and the Battle of Thermopylae, and I later found out in my 6th grade social studies class that I had to do a project, and this was one of the movies that actually, even though it's a movie and it's Hollywood drama, I guess, it actually made me understand their struggles and kind of what they had to go through as a warrior, and just the different types of settings and just different experiences that they had to experience. And with more movies, it's more of an emotional connection to of their hardships and experience that they went through. Historical movies, in terms of like the elections, or dating back to like the Civil War, or even just the presidency of Abraham Lincoln. There's many historical movies that will influence whether viewed in a theater or viewed in a classroom. It influences because children tend to retain those visual effects that they see and they experience through media. And it also offers a better understanding of, again, the time period in which the movie is dated. An author from the Common Sense Media quotes that empathy is one of the most important traits for living in an interconnected world. It's one of the character strengths and life skills essential to kids' overall growth and success. And also another quote from Scott Metzger, which is a teacher in a social studies class. He states that teachers need strong subject matter and knowledge about the topics portrayed, so that they can frame the movies and its relationship from fact and fiction. And this takes me on to my third point, which is television. And television tends to promote more creativity within children. There's different programs like the news, which influences or informs children on the current situations around the world. And it also gives geographical knowledge about the news in that specific, in the specific place. There's many documentaries on television which contain a vast knowledge of history, like the presidency of Abraham Lincoln. It also influences people. It contains documentaries of influential people which children look up to, and it also shares and it also shows pertaining to creativity and practice, like the show Shark Tank. Shark Tank is an entrepreneurship show which promotes imagination and creativity, and also engineering and invention as well. And also Ben Brazaru, he's an expert in child studies as well. He states that I was amazed at the creativity and imagination applied to these applications, and I was so appreciative that the people shared their imaginations and results with me, because I shared those ideas with other teachers, who then used or tweaked the new methodologies in their learning environment, and more people benefited from the sharing and conversations around a simple concept. And through all this, to conclude, this is why the media is beneficial. It promotes character, education, and creativity within children. And ultimately, children are kind of like sponges, so they absorb everything that they come in contact with. And yeah, this is why I just want to explain to you the influential effects that the media has on youth. So thank you.
All right, Devon, what did you think?
I think he did pretty good. He kept a pretty good eye contact the whole time. His body movements weren't too much, and he still used his hands and kept everything engaged. I think his what do you call it? The visual part wasn't too much either. So I think he did pretty good with all that. The only thing that it's hard to stop, because I know this having to sit there and say it is like ums and likes and in between is really hard to stop doing, but I know it's a big point in hear a lot in public speaking. Just trying to keep that minimal. You did that a lot, but that's about it. Something you can't really help without practice.
Well, practice does help, so you've got that correct. Anything else?
His hair was on point too. I thought that was
Okay. Well, Alexander, I like the personal experience that you had at the beginning as your attention device, where you referred to being in classes and seeming to be familiar with some of the materials, even though you hadn't taken class before. I thought that that worked pretty well. Your goals nicely stated. You've got a clear explanation about where you're going. Your visual at the beginning is probably not necessary, but it does preview for the audience and keeps the structure in our head so we know very clearly where you're headed during the presentation. Could you get by without it? Yes, but did it help? It certainly did. The materials developed okay. I do think that you have a tendency to talk about the subject quite a bit, and then you're going to plug in some information, and the information that you plug in doesn't always connect to the things that you were talking about before. They're relevant to the point, but they aren't necessarily relevant to the material that you were covering up until that particular part of the speech. And you want to be a little bit more consistent on that. But I did hear you citing information on each of the points. You had a couple of pieces of information on each of those things, and I thought that worked pretty well. I do have questions, of course, thinking about a lot of things concerning the ways in which video games create morality. I think that there's probably some sense of disconnect between what most people think of as the video games and what maybe the kinds of games that you're talking about. So it might need to be a little bit more clear when you're talking about that. The historical information, it would have been great when you were talking about how people might have picked up things from history in the video games. It might have been great if you could have used a couple of those examples, like the 300 when you were in the 6th grade, if you had some additional illustrations in other points when you said, oh, I was taking this English class, and they made a reference to the Old Globe Theater, and I remember playing a video game when I was a kid that involved that or something. I mean, just a couple more illustrations to go along with what you were talking about, and especially the ones that related to you, I think would help. It's topical in nature, it's easy to follow, the transitions are relatively clear, that's good. The visual materials, they were fine. They basically helped you with the transitions and reminding us about what the point was. I don't think that they added a lot to our understanding and knowledge of what you were talking about, but they were interesting to look at. And there was one that was a little bit busy. It's got the cartoon figure on it, and then there's a whole bunch of language around it, and I think that that's maybe a little full for what you're actually using it for, since all of those things don't become part of your discussion there. So that could be perhaps weeded out a little bit. I think you do a good job talking to the audience for 3/4 of the speech, and then when you get toward the end, you start leaning on the podium and on the desk, and that just looked weird. Up until that point, you were doing a good job talking to us, looking up at us, interacting. You're going to see it when you watch the video. It's like you get down in a 3-point stance almost. You've got one arm on the podium, one arm on the desk, and you're getting ready to tackle us, and so that just looked a little bit awkward. But like I said, the delivery stuff is a minor quibble. That's not what we're working on right now. Structure is good, content's pretty solid, and you seem to know where it was that you were trying to go with the speech. Thank you.